2 hours ago, the story that has been building since January came into full focus. President Trump posted on Truth Social that if Canada finalizes its trade deal with China, every single Canadian good entering the United States will face a 100% tariff. Not 25%. Not 35%. 100%. A tariff level the United States has never applied to a G7 ally. A tariff level previously reserved for adversarial states. Here is the part that makes this different from every other Trump tariff threat. 8 days earlier, a reporter asked Trump directly what he thought about Carney flying to Beijing to negotiate with China. Trump's answer, on the record, in front of cameras, that's what he should be doing. It's a good thing for him to sign a trade deal. If you can get a deal with China, you should do that. 8 days later, 100% tariffs. Same deal. Same Prime Minister. Same President. Completely opposite positions in 8 days. And Carney had already signed it. If this kind of analysis matters to you, hit subscribe. Because what happened in the space between those 8 days tells you everything about where North American trade is heading, and why Canada may have just made the most consequential strategic move of the entire trade war. Let's go back to January 15th, because that is where this story actually starts. Mark Carney flew to Beijing. This was not a casual diplomatic visit. It was the first trip by a Canadian Prime Minister to China since Justin Trudeau in 2017. Relations between the two countries had been frozen for years, strained by the Meng Wanzhou extradition case, by Chinese tariffs on Canadian canola, by mutual suspicion that had calcified into near-total diplomatic silence. Carney went anyway, and he came back with a deal. The structure of the agreement is straightforward. Canada opened its market to Chinese electric vehicles at a dramatically lower tariff, down from 100% to a fraction of that. In exchange, China agreed to drop the punishing tariffs it had placed on Canadian farm products, canola, lobster, crab, and peas. The farming side alone explains why Saskatchewan Premier Scott Moe, a conservative, flew to Beijing with Carney and called it a very positive day for Canada-China relations. China had been Canada's biggest agricultural customer, a multi-billion-dollar relationship. Chinese tariffs had effectively shut that market down. Canadian farmers had been watching billions of dollars in exports disappear. The deal reopens the door. Beyond farming and cars, the two countries announced a broader strategic partnership covering clean energy and investment in Canadian manufacturing. Carney said he expected considerable Chinese investment to follow, not just imports, but factories and jobs on Canadian soil. Carney also raised human rights in his meeting with President Xi. He said Canada has what he called value-based realism, engaging with the world as it is, not as one might wish it to be. He described Canada's relationship with China as having become more predictable than its relationship with the United States. That line landed in Washington like a stone in a still pond. This is where the sequencing matters. The same week Carney was in Beijing, Trump was in Davos at the World Economic Forum. At Davos, Trump told reporters about the Canada-China deal. That's what he should be doing. It's a good thing for him to sign a trade deal. If you can get a deal with China, you should do that. No threat. No warning. Explicit approval. Meanwhile, also at Davos, Carney was speaking on a separate panel. He did not name the United States. He did not name Trump. He described the current global moment as a rupture, not a transition, and warned that middle powers must act together because if you are not at the table, you are on the menu. He spoke about stronger countries using economic integration as weapons, tariffs as leverage, and supply chains as vulnerabilities to be exploited. Every person in that room understood who he was talking about. Trump responded from the podium. Canada lives because of the United States. Carney, later that week, responded directly. Canada doesn't live because of the United States. Canada thrives because we are Canadian. Trump revoked Carney's invitation to join his Board of Peace, a council he had been assembling to oversee global conflict resolution. Canada had been expected to join. The invitation was withdrawn the day before Trump's 100% tariff threat was posted. The sequence is important. Carney speaks in Davos. Trump takes it personally. Trump revokes the Board of Peace invitation. Trump posts the 100% tariff threat. All within 72 hours. The deal itself had been signed a week earlier, and Trump had praised it at the time. The 100% tariff threat has three specific problems that analysts and Canada's own cabinet ministers identified within hours of the post going live. The first problem is definitional. Trump's post says the tariffs will hit Canada if Canada makes a deal with China. Canada had already made a deal with China. The deal was already announced, already reported globally, already confirmed by both governments. So either the 100% tariff is already triggered, and Trump was not applying it, or the threat is ambiguous enough to be unenforceable as written. Canada's Trade Minister Dominic LeBlanc pointed out immediately that Canada is not pursuing a free trade agreement with China. The arrangement reached was a targeted tariff adjustment on specific products, not a comprehensive trade pact. The second problem is economic self-injury at scale. Canada is America's single largest trading partner, bigger than China, bigger than Mexico. The two countries do nearly $1 trillion in trade every year. Canada is the dominant supplier of aluminum, oil, and uranium to the United States. American factories, refineries, and nuclear plants are built around Canadian supply. A 100% tariff on all Canadian goods would not hurt Canada in isolation. It would immediately and severely disrupt American manufacturing, energy, and construction at a scale that no domestic alternative could replace in the short term. The third problem is the reversal itself. Trump said on January 16th that Carney signing a deal with China was good and what he should be doing. He said this on camera to reporters in public. 8 days later, the same deal became grounds for the most aggressive tariff threat Trump has leveled against any American ally. No new information had emerged about the deal. No terms had changed. The reversal tracked precisely to Carney's Davos speech, suggesting the 100% threat was a response to the speech, not to the trade deal. Canadian Minister Mark Miller's public response to reporters captured the official stance in 4 words. It is what it is. What happened in Ottawa was more deliberate than that 4-word response suggests. Carney did not hold an emergency press conference. He did not issue a counter-threat. He posted an online video reiterating that the government's response to economic threats would continue to be focusing on what Canada can control, and that the diversification strategy would stay the course. Justice Minister Sean Fraser said the events of the past months had demonstrated that the plan we broadcasted is the right one. He called the situation interesting and challenging times ahead for the Canadian economy, and then voiced confidence in the government's ability to navigate it. Cabinet ministers said privately and publicly that the 100% threat only confirmed the logic of what Carney had been doing for months. If Trump can threaten to triple the effective tariff rate on all Canadian goods because Carney gave a speech in Switzerland, then Canada's dependence on a single trading partner is not a relationship. It is a vulnerability. And the answer to a vulnerability is diversification. That is what the Beijing trip was. That is what the comprehensive partnership with Japan was, signed just days ago. That is what the trade mission across India, Australia, and Japan was. That is what the goal of doubling non-American exports within a decade is. Each week the trade war continues. Canadian exporters, agricultural producers, and energy companies build relationships with buyers who are not threatening 100% tariffs in response to diplomatic speeches. There is a structural irony buried in Trump's 100% tariff threat that several trade analysts flagged immediately. Trump's stated concern was that Canada would become a drop-off port for Chinese goods entering the United States, that Chinese products would flow through Canada to avoid American tariffs. This is a legitimate concern in trade policy, and rules of origin provisions in the USMCA specifically address it. Goods must meet minimum content requirements from North America to qualify for preferential treatment. But the Chinese cars entering Canada under the New Deal are entering the Canadian market. They are not being re-exported to the United States. Trade rules mean Chinese vehicles built entirely in China cannot simply pass through Canada and enter the U.S. as Canadian goods. Canada's trade minister confirmed the country is not pursuing a free trade agreement with China. The drop-off port framing does not apply to what was actually agreed. Trump himself had called the deal good before calling it grounds for 100% tariffs. And yet the threat exists. It is on record. It has been reported globally. It has been noted in every boardroom and government office in Canada that relies on American market access. The message it sends is not primarily about the China deal. The message is that American trade policy can reverse completely in 8 days based on a speech at a Swiss economic forum. That message is precisely the one Carney had been delivering to middle powers around the world. Not as a warning, as evidence. The international reaction was immediate and pointed. At Davos, Carney's framing of middle powers needing to act together had drawn standing attention from European and Indo-Pacific delegations. After the 100% tariff threat was posted, that framing gained a concrete illustration. Here was a G7 ally being threatened with trade punishment at levels usually reserved for adversaries, not because of a security breach, not because of a sanctions violation, but because its prime minister gave a speech describing economic coercion. The European Union, which has its own parallel trade tensions with Washington, noted the development. Japan, which had just signed a comprehensive strategic partnership with Canada 4 days earlier, was watching. South Korea, Australia, India, the countries Carney had just visited or was about to visit, were watching. Canada's strategy of building a coalition of middle powers is not a vague aspiration. Carney described it at the Lowy Institute in Australia. Countries committed to open trade, rule of law, and democratic governance, collectively representing a GDP larger than the United States, and trade flows 3 times the size of China's. The argument he is making is simple. These countries do not need to choose between Washington and Beijing. They need to build enough alternative infrastructure, trade agreements, investment channels, energy partnerships, that no single power can use access as a weapon. The 100% tariff threat did not undercut that argument. It illustrated it. So, where does this leave the relationship? The United States and Canada resumed direct trade talks on March 6th, the first face-to-face meeting between the two countries' trade ministers since Trump called off negotiations in October, ostensibly over a television advertisement in Ontario featuring Ronald Reagan's voice opposing tariffs. Canada's Trade Minister Dominic LeBlanc met with U.S. Trade Representative Jameson Greer in Washington. Trade analysts called it a positive sign. Talks continuing is better than talks not continuing. But the fundamental dynamic has not changed. Trump's approach to Canada has included 25% tariffs, 50% tariffs on steel and aluminum, threats to block a bridge Canada paid for, a 35% tariff threat, a 100% tariff threat, repeated suggestions Canada should become the 51st state, and a revoked invitation to a peace council, all within 14 months. Against that backdrop, Carney has signed a comprehensive partnership with Japan, reached a preliminary agreement with China, led a 9-day trade mission across Asia, spoken at the Australian Parliament, outlined a middle power coalition at Davos, and launched a government target to double non-American exports within a decade. Trump called Carney governor. Carney has been acting like a prime minister who read the situation correctly a year ago and has been executing accordingly ever since. 2 hours ago, Washington thought a 100% tariff threat would force Canada back to the table on American terms. What it actually did was give every middle power watching, in Tokyo, Brussels, New Delhi, Canberra, Seoul, One more data point confirming exactly what Carney has been telling them since Davos. The table has more than 2 seats, and Canada has been quietly setting the other ones.